So, Anya, welcome to Interesting Lives of Ordinary People. And in this podcast conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about your turning point, what you were doing before you got to where you are today. And really for us to get a little glimpse into what it was that has inspired you or motivated you to do what you do now. Now, in your own words, you describe yourself as a coach who helps people who are either going through a divorce or who have come through a divorce and now are navigating the pitfalls of life after divorce. And I think from my awareness, there are not that many people who specialize in that niche. Yet I'm sensing there's a huge demand for it because unfortunately lots of people are getting divorced.
Yeah,
So,
there is a huge demand, and
yeah,
there are many divorce coaches out there, but I get them coming through like my stream,
yes,
obviously. So they come through my stream, and I see more of them, and that can be both a good thing and there are so many out there when in fact there aren't. The thing about it is though that people don't always realize when they're going through it, the benefit of going through divorce, the benefit of having somebody.
yes,
And so sometimes, and I know it was the same with me when I went through my divorce, um, sometimes I needed that distance from that very raw emotion that divorce brings. And, I think everybody um, is affected. People, you can have a good divorce, or like a positive divorce, but actually at the nub of it, it is an ending. It is a bereavement. Whether
yeah,
it's somebody died a good death or not, there is still a bereavement
yes.
or aspect to it.
And I totally agree with you. And every divorce is kind of a little bit different, isn't it? So there's no kind of blueprint for what a divorce should look like. And I think having that person who's going to be by your side, but not emotionally connected with you can be really powerful.
Mm.
So we're going to talk a bit more about that in a little while. But I want to go back to the turning point. What was it that was the first kind of experience you had that has brought you to where you are today?
Oh gosh, it was a journey. So I was in teaching. I've been teaching for 37 years. And my mantra, if you like, or my guiding value, which I got from my father, is that people need to be seen, heard, and acknowledged. Whether
Mm,
you're 100 or whether you're a child, you need to be seen, otherwise you're invisible. You need to be heard, otherwise you're silent. And you need to be acknowledged, otherwise you don't exist.
yeah.
And particularly when people go through trauma. So that was because of what the government at the time was bringing in for, expectations and the pressure. Having gone through a divorce, I just think I lost, and I will say the school I worked at were very, very supportive. It wasn't them, but it was this sense of I don't have the emotional capacity at the end of a day to actually sort myself out.
Mm,
And so I went through most of my divorce, well, all of my divorce actually, the actual until sign the paper, um, while I was doing full-time job teaching with very needy children. Um, but the turning point for me in how I was going to go through my divorce was very, very early on, probably within a couple of weeks of my husband leaving. And that
mm,
was when I sat on my bed on a very cold January, and I don't do cold, I'm not very good on cold. And I plotted revenge for 2.5 hours. I sat there just in my mind going through all of these scenarios, and it was good. It was a really satisfying feeling. If that happens, that would make me feel better because he was getting his just desserts or whatever. Um, so after about 2.5 hours, I'm a Christian, and I just said to God, I got to this, what I call the junction of choice. Do I go for instant gratification and, develop a chasm that becomes unbridgeable? Or do I go for the most positive outcome for everybody and for legacy? Because our daughter would have been about 19 at the time, well, 17 at the time I was thinking this. But, when you look to the future, and I just said to God, I'm just laying this at the cross. This has been dealt with, and I want to go the way of positive outcome, which initially is counterintuitive, really, because that's not how you're feeling. But
Yeah.
there's a thing about doing something and letting the feelings catch up. And so that's when I made my decision to go for the most positive outcome. And that was in, it didn't, I wasn't perfect in it. I slipped up at times. But the majority of the time was for me setting up systems where I had people holding me to account lovingly.
Mm.
So I had a friend, and for about 6 months until I got into the swing of it, really, I would send every email that I sent to my now ex-husband's solicitors. Um, and she would have to check it for rage, for anger, for criticism, for judgment, because I wanted to step back from the emotion of it and just deal with the practical. But going through divorce is a very emotional time,
Yeah.
and people change. These people that you've lived with, for me, it was like 23, 25 years when the divorce was granted.
Mm.
But, suddenly they become very demanding and very interested in money, and all of those things are then fueled by all the emotion that's going on, because you have to deal with that as well. So that for
Yeah.
me was the turning point, and setting up those systems, and but actually not having anybody that I knew closely who had been through it. Nobody in my family had, you know. So that was really the turning point.
Yes, and I have a few sort of follow-up questions on that, if I may. I think what you said was so powerful about the emotions and acknowledging them. And I love that you said, you sat on your bed and for 2.5 hours you plotted revenge. And I think the feelings of, upset and grief and betrayal and all the rest of it that comes with that sort of feeling of being abandoned. Um, Sometimes it's healthy to just process it and allow it to be kept
Absolutely.
in a safe space,
Absolutely.
isn't it?
At
Which
the
is
end
so
of
good.
that,
Mm,
I'm not going to do this, and giving it to God uh, to help me deal with it, because that is my reference point. He is my reference point. Um, I actually remember saying, I'm not going to do it, but I had to go through that process, because if you don't look at things, you don't have to act on it, but you
yes,
don't have to deny, and I don't think it's healthy to deny your humanity within that.
yes.
And I think it's important to always go through those processes, and not, it's this thing that we all have to be perfect and, you know, glide through it. And yes, we get, television, movies, it's, you in a television series, in 2 months they're through it all, and it's all, and they're into a new relationship, and you think, as a
It's
voyeuristic
yes,
operation, of course it sells programs and people watch it because they connect with that. But in real life, that pain takes a lot more than just having a few glasses of wine with a friend and
yes,
sobbing your heart out. Because even though your friends love you, they'll tell you often what they think you need to hear or want to hear to make you feel better, because that's what friends do, isn't it?
mm,
And when sometimes you need, and what I do is say to people, I'm walking through this with you. You're all over the place. And that's both men and women. Men, I think, in a slightly different way because the pressure on them to is not to show emotion, and you know, uh, and they retreat in a different way. And if there are children involved, the majority of the time it is the mother who has, is left with the children initially until co-parenting orders are sorted.
Yes.
It's a minefield,
Yeah.
but yeah.
How long did it took going back to that, that January where you sat on your bed and you plotted revenge, that then ultimately you said you surrendered to your faith and you so tell us about that. So what happened then and how did you know what the right thing to do was or what was a positive outcome? Because I'm just imagining that in that moment it's not very clear what
Mm.
life is going to look like at the end of that very dark tunnel.
I think that's it. I always describe it as like a watercolor painting or a pen and ink painting, and that's your future, and you see that, and then somebody comes and tosses a bucket of water on it, and it's all blurred, but there's still bits that are there.
Mm.
And I think at that moment, I think the uncertainty and the fear and the trauma that comes in is, oh my goodness, what's going to happen now? I don't know. Not that we know our futures, but I don't know where to go and how to go forward. And which is why people often, uh, who have been in abusive marriages or controlling marriages will go to the same type of person because that's that's a terrain that they know. And
Yes.
it's scary being on your own, you
Yeah.
know. And I'm quite an independent person. I enjoy my own company, but there are times having been in a relationship that I sometimes would like that again. And I've not met anybody particularly that I've been interested in or
Yes.
or that connection has been made. But the thing about it is, for me as a woman of faith, I trust totally that God has my future sorted. Doesn't mean I get a check to pay whatever bill I need to pay, but there's a certainty that I don't have to be anxious.
Yeah.
And anxiety presents in different ways. That doesn't mean I don't worry at times, but it means that when I find myself doing that, I then realign myself with the knowledge and the truth that God has my future in his hands. But there was two things. I was going to say something else about, how you feel. And I remember somebody saying to me, and I would urge people to be cautious, saying to me in a loving way, not sort of dismissing what I was going through, but she said to me, Anya, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I looked at her and I could say it to her because she knew me. I said, I know, but I can't see it. At the
Mm.
moment, I'm in total darkness. I can't even see a chink of that light, but I know it's there. And I know, and that became almost like the metaphor and journey that I was on, that I could see a bit of the light and then more of the tunnel. And finally, I was at the end of the tunnel. Um, but I remember saying to her, I can't see it. All I know is that in this darkness, Jesus is walking beside me. And and then I saw a bit of the light. And then I remember somebody at my work 6 weeks after my husband had left saying, oh, it's been 6 weeks, draw a line under it, go and find somebody else. And I was absolutely stunned because I thought that's not quite how it works. And I always say this to people who are going through divorce. When you get that final judgment, the final, decision, in my day it was called the decree absolute. You get that bit of paper in your hand and it's like, well, what now?
Yes.
So because the goal that you've been working towards has been to get that bit of paper.
Yes.
And so when I work with people going through divorce who are not yet divorced, um, and a lot of that is just helping them hold themselves together emotionally, and to stand back and say, okay, you need to fill this form in. Whether you think it's fair or not, you need to fill it in honestly. And whether or not, you've just had this massive row with your ex, you still have to fill this in because there's a timeline on this. But people at the same time allowing them to vent and allowing them to do that. This is, and I vent their anger, their frustration, and their hurt, but also to say, okay, when are you going to get this done by?
Yeah.
Do you need help in this? I help where I can, but I'm not a solicitor. I'm not legally trained. And also then, as the time comes for, it all to be signed off, to say, well, what are you thinking about doing now? So that you don't get that piece of paper and think, what now?
Yes.
And the big question, I think, is who am I now? Because for me, for 25 years, I'd been married to this person. Who am I now? And I wasn't like, I was was independent, but you still are part of a relationship. And I think I always say to people, when you get that bit of paper, you might go through a slump. I help you answer the what now, what's next
Yes.
question, and then work with people to find that.
Yeah. So the goal shouldn't be getting that piece of paper that says, okay, now you're formally divorced, but to actually plan what your life is going to be like once you are divorced. Because in all practical senses, I suppose, not practical, emotional senses, you already are. You've already
Mm.
separated from that person. And it's just the legal stuff that needs to be sorted, so the money is
Yes.
separated, etc. So when it was your turn to go through all of this, what were the sort of top three biggest challenges that you experienced, and how long ago was this, Anya, that you
Well,
got?
we got the decree absolute in 2010.
Okay.
For me, I'd been in my late 20s when I got married, so I had lived on my own. I traveled from New Zealand on my own, lived in the Netherlands for a couple of years, and then come to London not knowing anybody. Um, and so, that part didn't, I knew I could do that. Um, I think that the biggest thing for me actually was to actually sign the papers.
Mm,
Not the papers for the financial bit, to sign the papers because, I'd made my promises before God and I'd made this contract before him. And I took that very seriously. And
mm,
I just days and days, if not weeks, could not sign that. But I had two very sage friends who actually she just we went for a walk one evening and she said, you're signing the civic contract, in civil law.
mm.
The contract that you made before God has already been broken. So you're not breaking that. That has already been done. And just having that, it was like when people say things to you and it's like, oh yeah, but it's more than oh yeah. It just brings it into perspective. And so that was the most difficult, I think. Um, I think the sense of betrayal
Mm.
is one of the hardest to, I think, particularly if another person is involved. So if there's infidelity, um, that was the most difficult in that category of difficult because, and when I say it to other women, they just get it. Other women, I say it like you've just been taken and you've been put aside because you're not good enough anymore. They've found somebody better.
Mm.
And I think part of that is pride, I think, but also it's a very deep hurt. It's a very deep betrayal of trust. And that took me a long time, to get over. And part of the process was walking around not like a zombie, but I wasn't present.
Yes.
I was often in other places trying to just deal with what that was throwing at me. Yeah.
And of course, having a child in that, obviously your daughter was 19, so it was 17, you said.
Well,
Um,
when her father left, yeah.
yeah, still very young and still very kind of, you know, aware of what's going on. So it's
Yes.
harder in some ways. Or I don't know, is it harder or is it easier to have the
Um,
child in the picture? What do you,
well, she's an intelligent person.
yeah.
Um, she's an amazing person, actually. And she was at boarding school at the time, so she missed a lot of what was happening at home. And she said to me a couple of years after, she said, "How come I didn't know?" And I went, "Well, I guess I made sure you didn't, because I
Mm,
didn't want her relationship with men to be affected by that." And but I think also the thing she said to me, it broke my heart. She was having a meltdown in the front room, and our living room didn't have any net curtains or anything. And there, people always walking by. I said, "You need to go upstairs to your room." I'm not like sending to your room. You need to go upstairs to your room and just sit, find a space. And so I left her for a bit, and then I went up, and she was sitting on the floor. And so I sat down next to her, and she said, "But he left me too." That
mm,
broke my heart, because that everybody becomes, I think the person who leaves has already made their mind up well before they move. This is like, when you choose to leave your work and go to I'm going to apply for a new job, and then you're leaving, but you've processed that.
yes.
And you've processed it often without telling anybody else. And that's what happens in a lot of marriages. The person leaving has already processed it. So there's a shock element to the people staying behind.
Yes.
And I think, I can't speak for my daughter, but I think it was a shock to her. But there's also a sense of being left. She still has a relationship with her father. She still sees him. But now they're all part of the family. This is like now a blended and extended family, if you like, between her father and his new wife.
Mm,
But um, I don't tend to. I think I tend to share things now that she's older, because she's in her 30s now. She's a mother. She's a wife and a mother, and you can say things without bitterness, and you can just but we still laugh at things that were good, because that one thing hasn't didn't then erase everything that was good, and that you know growing up that was fun, and her dad and me being a couple and doing silly things. And so it's a it's a minefield. It's a minefield.
yeah. I no, I completely get that. And I think what your experience reminds us is that for some people they wait until their children are maybe adults, 18, 19, and think, okay, then we can divorce because then it won't affect them so much. And I think what your story reminds us, or your experience reminds us, is that actually your children may be a little bit older, but the grief is still, it's probably
Hmm.
a different kind of grief. Maybe the need that they had for the parent who's leaving has changed, but it's still pretty raw, isn't it?
um it's about how you navigate it, and it's about how you face up to it. Now, if you have a divorce where somebody suddenly won't give an inch, and you know money is the thing, and you're not having that, and everything to the last penny. I had that. um and as I said, I trust that God is going to provide for me, not by a check through the post necessarily, although that would be nice. um so I have there's for me there is a serenity there. But y- it's a really difficult thing to have to deal with, that you need to deal with when you don't want to deal with it. And if you don't, it's like, I always say, it's like a wound, and it scabs over. And the scabbing over can be the time. But if you keep going back and picking that scab off and looking at the wound, you're not giving it a chance to heal, but you're just looking at what caused it, how it hurts, and it still hurts because you've taken the scab off it. So you let the scab regrow and then do the same, and this becomes, a repeating activity. If you don't deal with each other, the emotional intelligence is not there, or for somebody to begin to deal with it, and that's kind of where I come in, part of
Mhm.
what I do, then it festers and it takes a really deep root. And,
Yeah.
you know, when our daughter got married, we hadn't been divorced very long, about a year, and if that. And, you know, we were both able to stand in the church and we were both able to receive people and enjoyed the day that was for our daughter and our really fantastic son-in-law. Had we not sorted some of the stuff out, then, or it had been arguing and antagonism all the way, then we wouldn't have been able to do that. But actually, that day was not about us. And so what tends to happen is that people who don't get it sorted, every time they meet, a birthday, a wedding, it's about them.
Yeah.
And somebody was telling me that he was best man at a wedding, and one of his jobs was to keep the groomsmen's, no, to keep the groom's parents separated. He said I had to keep them like make sure they weren't near each other, that they weren't like not, but just that they kept their distance of each other. And I
Yeah.
said, why? And I said, had they just divorced? He said, no, they've been divorced 25 years. And I think, who who has the energy to carry that hatred? And that's what it is.
Yes.
And that anger through
And
25 years, and not be able to celebrate your son or your daughter's, wedding or graduation or something because it's about you and not them.
it's so corrosive, isn't it, when you hold that
Oh,
kind of thing?
absolutely.
One of the things I do is I'm a certified emotion code practitioner, and it's sort of helping identify these trapped emotions, and this is why when you were saying earlier about how you allowed those emotions to be expressed in a safe way before you decided what the right thing to do was. A lot of people don't do that. They just either they
Very
try to be
reactive.
good. Hmm?
It's reactive. It's a reactive
Reactive,
response.
or in some cases they because they're trying to do the right thing from the get-go, they never allow themselves to acknowledge these feelings of hurt and anger, and so they just fester and they come out in other ways that are not good for us.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I just maybe to finish off on yours and your ex-husband's experience, I'm curious to know, now that you're friends and you have a lovely blended family, which is, I think,
I know. Well, when I say we don't see each other
okay.
because I live in Birmingham and he lives down in London.
Okay.
And I don't even think in London we would have. No, the point I'm making there is that when we do see each other, we can have a conversation. You can share in a laugh.
Yes.
I don't know. I'm not there yet, I think, on being, because I'm not his friend anymore. I was his best
Mm,
friend, but I'm not anymore. And
yeah.
that's simply because um I've had to set boundaries up for me, but the boundaries are not a wall where I won't speak to him or his wife. In fact, I've been in situations where, um, I've kind of met up with them accidentally, and then, I initially I relied on the good manners my parents, instilled in me,
Yes.
and then it becomes easier. But to say that I would like be best friends, I'm not there yet. Um,
No,
but I
I
don't
think
hate him, if that makes.
yeah, no, I think that's probably a step too far, isn't it, to become best friends? But I was just curious to know whether you both had anyone who you could together go to for help with the divorce process, because obviously there's emotions that each one of you is individually dealing with, but it can sometimes be helpful to have a like a mediator person.
Yeah.
Not
Well, I
look.
mean, now they're bringing this up, more
Mm,
and more in divorce, is that
yes.
you have to go to mediation. And there
Yeah.
are people who, and I've met them who are divorced and are friends with, they go on holiday with their partners. I, that's not within my experience.
Yeah. Yes. And I want to now talk about how when you decided to turn your own experience into something that you can help others with. How long did that take you?
Well, that was when, I told you I'd been a teacher for 37 years, and I was in the shower one day and I thought, I just don't want to do this anymore. This is not what I signed up for. And I
Mm,
was speaking with somebody who had observed a lesson of mine, and and I had already decided to take early retirement. And we were talking, and I said it to her. And she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know, supply teaching." And she said, your skill set is too experienced for that. Have you thought of NLP? Well, I didn't know what she was talking about. She said, have you thought of coaching? Which I'd over the years thought, oh, that looks interesting. So I'm now a master practitioner um, in NLP. And I sat there because I used to do behavior management at school, when I was teaching. And I thought, I've been doing this all my life, not just saying, here's a consequence, but trying to find a way of, okay, let's get to the point just before you start throwing chairs around the room or you go into a meltdown. And I was sat talking with somebody, I was on a call with somebody on a course I was doing, and he said to me, well, what is your niche going to be? And I said, I haven't got a clue. And he said, what are you passionate about? I said, I'm passionate about empowering women, particularly, uh, of enabling them.
mm,
And he said, in what area? And I just said, in coping and surviving divorce. And that's how it started. And then um, it was just women. I just said, I coach women. And then a few men came along and said, would you coach us? And and that was a different way of coaching. But I'm quite anybody who knows me well, I'm very straightforward and direct in what I say. And I think for a lot of men, but they want straightforward, which is not to say that they don't need that, the calm gentleness, but
yeah.
a lot of them deal better when you say, okay, so you didn't do that. What is it not why didn't you do it, but well, what is it that you're going to do?
Yes.
And what is it you want? And so, yeah, so it's gone from just being with, dealing with women, working with women to working with men as well.
Yes.
And people who live together and same-sex couples. So
Yeah. And to what extent can people come preemptively to you? Almost like I know you're not a relationship counselor, but but almost sort of trying to get a positive outcome, whether it's a divorce or whether it's, choosing not to divorce. Do you do that as well, or is it really focused on women who are going, or women or men going through a divorce? And
well, coaching is coaching.
yes,
And I would rather help somebody prevent a divorce
yes.
if that's where they're going. So I have had three examples of that, where a chap came to me and I worked with him, and he and his partner have stayed together. They went back together,
Mm,
and great, celebrate that. I think marriage is difficult. It's amazing, but it's difficult. And
mm,
I remember somebody recently was sort of saying, you come into a marriage with all the good and bad things of how you were brought up and how your parents were married, and that comes together. And if they're not congruent, then that's where there can be issues. It's about being prepared, I think, to ask the tough questions, have them asked of you, and find solutions. Because somebody I spoke to, and he said, he had just signed the papers, and he was, I said to him, how are you feeling? Where are you at? He said, I'm just holding it together.
mm,
And we had a conversation, in the view to to work together. And he said, I just feel that we can work this out. And I met him recently and I said, "How's it going?" He said, "You know, we worked it out. We worked really hard at it. We're still together, but we know actually that we have to keep very short accounts with one another."
Mm.
Those are all, great. Who wouldn't celebrate that? Yeah,
That's a party that's worth celebrating, isn't
yeah,
it? Um, I think from what I sort of see and hear, sometimes men, and you said this yourself, men have it harder simply because they don't express their emotions as much.
yeah.
They probably don't have the way women have girlfriends who, they can just cry. Well,
Mm.
men don't do that. I was talking to, the husband of my very good friend, who's also a friend, and I was saying, do you guys ever sit down and talk about feelings? And they're like, of course not.
Mm.
And so I just wonder, when you are dealing with somebody, maybe who's not the one who's being left, but the one who's leaving, do you get clients like that too? Someone who's chosen to leave, but of course
Yes,
has their own complex emotions that are hard to deal with?
yes, and I've not worked with somebody, but I had conversations with two men who had been divorced 2 and 3 times
Mm.
and remarried. And then they will share, like, the issue is, so how like, my wife is not, she doesn't believe it when I say this, and I said, "Well, what do you think you have to do there? What do you think that issue is?" He said, "But I tell her it's," and this is, I think, quite a moment. I tell her it doesn't matter, and yeah, well, you need to show her. You need
Mm.
to figure out, because you're, building her confidence. She knows she's wife number 3.
Yes.
And whilst that can be great, and I've met people who have, they're the third marriage, and it's lasted 25 years and it's brilliant. And when you're in the initial stages of that and you're younger, you've got to think about the perception that they have of what you're saying. And what you think you're saying is not what they're actually thinking you're saying. So, and men, actually, I have a barrister who works overseas on my LinkedIn feed, and he speaks often about the man, the father,
Mm.
where, because I think one of the biggest problems can be weaponizing of children.
Yes, I
You
think
know,
I remember that post because you commented or liked it, and I was thinking, yeah.
and I
Sorry.
think that's, yeah, no, but I think it is weaponizing children. Um,
Mm.
and and it's difficult, isn't it? Because they've been let down, or he doesn't show up, or they go for a week and they don't have to go to bed on time, and there's no routine, and then you're the one that's, the wife or the ex-wife is the one that has to um bring that all back together. When I first saw not this chap, but about a man going on about, how women just fleeced you and divorce was so difficult for men, I can remember something inside of me thinking, and getting really annoyed. And then thinking, well, why am I so annoyed about that? And then I thought, well, it's probably because of some of the things that happened to me,
Mm.
that I had to then work out how I felt about meeting somebody who had left their wife for somebody else.
Yeah.
Um, but I think also we, you know, aside from deterioration of mental health in men, which is higher in divorced men, they're separated from their kids. They're they don't have, like, come home and the kids are there and you can just tuck them into bed, or, share a joke with them. It's all got to be done within a certain time frame, and they have different pressures. And um, so I think we need to look at that as well. This whole weaponizing is, well, if you've left me, you've left your kids. And a friend of mine, his wife refused to allow their son to see him. And in telling me how he felt through that, because she just, wouldn't let him speak to her. It wasn't in this country, it was in another country. And he said the minute he turned 18, he rang me. And, you sort of think you've gone through, it was like 6 years, 12 when the marriage broke up. And some
Uh,
people are even longer. And so it's a big mess
yeah.
sometimes. And so that's like looking, sort of saying to people, if this is what you want, how are you going to get there? And is there going to be collateral damage? And what collateral damage are you prepared to allow? And that might be the weaponizing of your children.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
That, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a sad reality of how, I suppose it's, how do I take control of the situation that feels so out of control? Because
yeah.
you were the main breadwinner, now you've left me, and now, what are the things that I have that I can actually hurt you with? And so the children maybe,
And that's the 2.5 hours of revenge
yes.
that, and I think that, I think because that was the turning point, because I
Yeah.
never thought about revenge after
I
that.
think one of the things that women should consider for themselves, whether they're in a happy marriage or not, or whether they're even young and not yet married, is to how to be as financially independent and self-sufficient as possible,
Mm.
and not outsource that to your husband just because you're married and he's earning more.
Well,
Because
this,
yes, sorry.
oh, so sorry, yeah, this is the thing, because when it went to court, and it was all meant to be agreed, and the judge said to me, all of my colleagues would do the same. It's not fair, but all of my colleagues would do the same, because I was the greater uh, breadwinner. I had a teaching pension, um, in that stage I was paying into. And a law came, I think it was in the late 80s or in the 90s, where um, you got a share of the person's pension, so that the future pensions were kind of equaled up.
Mm,
And my husband had, when all the pension, I think it would have been in the 80s, late 80s, all the pension pots or companies, a lot of them went bust. He
mm,
lost about 9 years of his pension. And so in order to make it equal, a percentage, and a significant percentage of my pension went to him.
mm,
A friend who came to court with me, she was so, she still says, when I think about it, I get annoyed. I'm more than annoyed, angry. She was really angry. And I said to her, look, as a woman, I've always believed in equal rights and equality, and you can't cherry pick those.
mm,
That law was put in to protect women at that time who had been at home all their lives supporting their husbands' professions or jobs, bringing up their children, and doing that, the people who don't work, the
yeah.
women at home, the ones who you don't have a job,
Mm,
and then they leave just short of retirement, or they leave, and they were taking, some of them, 6, 7 figure pensions with them, and they were not entitled to any of them, to any
mm,
of it, and they didn't have their own pension in
yes.
place, or certainly not one that was equal. And so this law was brought in about sharing, pension sharing. And my friend was, it was like she was so angry. And I said, look, this law was brought in to make it fair. I'm just now on the other side of it because I earn more.
Mm,
Whether or not I agree with the financial claims that my ex-husband made is neither here nor there. It's what the court decides.
yeah.
And that did, particularly when I got my pension and I saw how much was going to him, I thought, but actually for me, it's money. It's in a sense only money.
Yes.
It's not somebody's life. It's not, I had a place that I had a roof over my head. I had a job that would give me independence, continue my independence. And so, but that law has caused so much animosity
I agree with you.
because equality is not something that you can cherry pick. It is what it's equality. It's equal. You can't just say, I'll have that bit and that bit, but I won't have that bit, you know.
Couldn't agree more. So I'm conscious that we've chatted for, longer than I thought. It's been so interesting. And just my final question to you in terms of, um, I sort of like asking my guests, what a fulfilled life looks like for them. And what for you, what does a fulfilled life look like? And are you already there or are you kind of working towards it?
Well, I think we're always striving, aren't we, for I don't know, the grass being greener. I have a fulfilled life. I moved to Birmingham from London and I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? My daughter was up here. I only have one child. I have two lovely granddaughters. And as I said, an amazing son-in-law. He winds me up, absolutely. But I love the bones of him. And it's, I'm in a church where God is really like pouring out his blessing. And that's so exciting. Yeah, I'm in a good place.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to leave us with? Obviously, your website we'll post just for people to know the website
Yes,
because
it's on
screen has
website.
got a co missing in it. We'll put the correct link in the show notes. And yes, and is there anything else you want to tell, potential people who want to work with you about what to expect?
You will get through this.
Yeah,
You will get through it. It'll pass. You will get through it. It's your choice on how you get through it.
yeah. And having someone like you to guide them makes them sort of compassionately accountable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and a lot of laughs. Because
So
if
important.
you can't laugh, you've got to cry.
Yeah,
And we do a
absolutely.
bit of that as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Anya. I really enjoyed this conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.